All right, so we're recording. Welcome to the residential purchase agreement class. It's my third class I'm doing, all on Zoom. If you missed the other classes, let me know, and I can get you the link to at least one of them. The first one we forgot to record. So let's go ahead and get into this. Today we're going to go over the residential purchase agreement. This is a big document. After you're done viewing homes and you have your pre-approval ready and you're ready to make an offer, this is where this document will come into play. So it's a lot of words and let's just go over it. So the first form, there's a lot of disclosures attached to the residential purchase agreement. So this is the first one, the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship. And this is how we represent you in the transaction. So if you're a seller's agent, this you have a fiduciary duty to that seller, a duty of honest and fair dealings in good faith, a duty to disclose all facts known to the agent materially affecting the value or desirability of the property that are not known to or within the diligent attention and observation of the parties. An agent is not obligated to reveal to either party any confidential information obtained from the other party. And that does not involve the affirmation duties set forth above. So they have a fiduciary duty of utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in dealing with the seller. Same goes for the buyer's agent. And this class is about buying. So if you're looking to buy, I would have a fiduciary duty to you if I was representing you in a transaction to buy a home. There's also this one right here, agent representing both the buyer and the seller, or the seller and the buyer. That is if I had a listing and you wanted to see my listing and make an offer on that house. I would have to, number one, agree to represent both the seller and the buyer, but also the seller and the buyer both have to agree to let me represent both of them. That would be called a dual agency, where one brokerage or one agent is representing both sides. So that is the difference there. So that's the agency relationship disclosure. This is a civil code. This is going to go over the civil code and talk about you make the decisions, not us. We are just here to guide you. Okay, and then we get into the California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. And this is called the grid of the purchase agreement. This is where all the details are going to go in. So, excuse me. Okay, so you can see date prepared. I'm going to put in my name. No. Hmm. Oh, sorry. I have allergies, so that's not helping. Okay. So we'll put in the name of where it's who it's from, then the property. You put the parcel number, the county, the city. Well, city's right here. And then county right here. Okay. Okay. And then the parcel number. And the parcel number is usually six numbers. And we'll do like that. Okay. And then we have the agency right here, how we represent you. So if we have a listing agent, their information is going to go there, whoever is listing the home. And then you can see here the buyer brokerage firm, that's my information. And I would fill in the rest. And then I forget what theirs is, but we would fill in all of that information. And then down here is where you would put your purchase price. So you would decide on what price that you want to offer, and then we write that into the purchase. If it's all cash, you're going to mark the all cash offer, and then the close of escrow. Usually we do a 30-day close of escrow, so we would put in 30 days there unless your lender said otherwise. And then the expiration of this offer is 3 calendar days after all the buyer's signatures, or if we specify. So we can even say, like, if we wanted them to respond quick, we could say tomorrow at 5 p.m., get back to us. And sometimes people will do that in a really busy market to try to get their offer accepted. Initial deposit. So this is going to be your earnest money deposit. This is the money that gets put into the title company 3 days after you have an accepted offer. And it can be whatever number you want. And so we'll just put in, let's just say $2,000. Okay. The loan amount what would be whatever your loan is minus your down payment. So since we're saying we're going to offer 400,000, maybe your down payment is 25,000. So then your loan amount would come out to $375,000. Okay. And then down here we have the balance of the down payment would be 23,000 because you're already going to put $2,000 in 3 days after your offer is accepted. And this deposit, that initial deposit amount, gets held with the title company and gets included in your down payment at close. If, however, you don't end up closing, then the buyer and the seller have to sign a release of that deposit. So I always tell my clients, let's get our inspections, see if you want the house, and if not, we can use the inspections as your contingency to back out. And both parties, the buyer and the seller, have to sign the release with the title company to release the $2,000. Um, it can happen where the seller might not want to sign that. Maybe the buyer doesn't want to sign it. And at that point, it would become a litigation issue where those parties would have to go and litigate within each other. Uh, Also important to know that the seller can't necessarily move on to another transaction until that deposit is released. So down here you can see the occupancy type. It would be if primary, usually a lot of primary, unless you're an investor, you're looking for an investment property, then we would mark as or secondary home or investment. Okay. And so next page, if we need a seller credit would be, let's just say $3,000. It would be for closing costs. And this would be money that the seller would give you back through the escrow account to help you pay for any closing fees. And the closing fees would be for the title and escrow company and also your lender. And maybe you have to bring in part commission or something. So there's the seller credit would help you pay for those things. Any additional seller credit terms we would put there. This is where seller payment to compensate buyer's broker. And this is where I would put in my fee. And we would be asking the seller to pay for the buyer's obligation to cover my fee and my commission. So say the seller doesn't cover that full fee or they counter the offer back and maybe they want to pay less than that. So what we would do is we would talk. We would talk, and I would ask you to either bring in the difference so that I could be compensated fairly for my job, or you would move on alone without my representation, or we would look at other homes where the seller was able to help the buyer pay for their buyer broker obligation. Verification of all cash funds. We either attach it to the offer or we mark this box that they'll be delivered 3 days after an accepted offer. Any verification of down payment and closing costs, and then also the verification of loan application. So this is where I'd be asking your lender for a pre-approval letter or something that shows us that you're ready to buy this house and that you have the funds to do that. Final verification of property within 5 days of closing on your house, we'll go and do a final walkthrough of that. Any assignment requests, you'll have 17 days to do that. That means if maybe you need someone to get the loan for you, you're going to assign the loan to them, then we have to do that within 17 days. The loan contingency is 17 days. So that means after the 17th day, we would be asked to remove that contingency. The contingency is something that is protects the buyer or protects the seller. So we would want to make sure that the loan is good to go by that day. A lot of times I'll write in 30 days here, and that means that the loan contingency would um, be extended to 30 days rather than 17. So that gives us a little bit more security, knowing that we're going to be able to get the loan, and this gives us the contingency and right to back out if we don't get the loan within 30 days. If you don't have a loan, then you would just mark no loan contingency because if it was a cash offer, or no appraisal contingency if you were not planning on getting an appraisal. You'll see that 17 days for appraisal, that is, we'd have 17 days to get the appraisal. So if the appraiser couldn't come out in that 17 days, we would ask the seller for an extension on that contingency. Another boilerplate 17-day contingency. That's for the investigation of the property. So that means within the first 17 days, we're going to find out all about the property. We're going to get our professional inspectors there, contractors, roofers to look at it and to give you a good idea of what you're buying. And after that 17 days, you, the buyer, can then go and ask the seller for what's called a request for repairs. And excuse me, and this means that say you find out the roof needs to be replaced and it's going to be $20,000. So then we can ask the seller after that 17-day investigation period or at that day, ask the seller if they can help either pay for it, reduce the price, or give you a credit. And so we can talk about what's going to be best for you at that time. Or at that point, if it's going to be too much, we give the seller a notice to cancel and we get out of that transaction. Insurance, all these other things, 17 days. So unless we change the contingency days on this, they will be at the boilerplate. And then we do our best to stay on track with those contingencies. And we will be expected to remove them at the day that the contract says and that both parties agree to. Time of possession upon recordation. So like the house is recorded, then I get to give you the keys. And the title company lets me know when that happens. If there's any seller occupied or vacant units, maybe the seller needs some time after the sale to get their things out of the home. That would be where we would mark there. Maybe the seller told us that. So maybe you'd give the seller 5 days to get their stuff out. I don't recommend that, but that's what that's for. Occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller. So the tenants have rights. There are special documents when you buy the investment property with tenants. All the leases and the deposits will be transferred over to the new buyer. And the seller has to give us that information so that you can review it in the investigation period. So seller has 7 days to give us all their disclosures, and that's everything that they know about the property. So they have to disclose everything that they are aware of. They'll have, okay, so 7 days to do smoke alarms and stuff. So within that 17 day investigation period, that's when we're going to be reviewing everything. So after your offer is accepted, we're scheduling appointments for inspections. We're getting the seller disclosures. We are ordering the appraisal with your lender. We are getting your earnest money deposit into the title company to secure your transaction. And we're sailing from there. Okay. So items included. Maybe you go in and you want the stove. So we're going to mark the stove, refrigerator. You want the washer and dryer because you don't have one. So we're going to mark those. And then we can ask the seller to pay for those. Any excluded items. Maybe there's an old car we don't want the old car, so we want to exclude that, and we'll just ask them to remove it. Um, right here, the natural hazard disclosure form, we usually just ask the seller to pay for that. That's pretty common in our area, and the seller will pay for that at the close of escrow. But that's part of their disclosures. Usually right here, smoke alarm and CO2 detectors and water bracing. We usually ask the seller to pay for that too. We have government point of sale requirements. That would be like sewer lateral requirements. Or if you have a VA loan, this can come into play. I usually don't mark anything on that. Typically, that can scare off a seller by marking those things. So we leave that blank and we negotiate in what we need to. But we can mark those if we need to. And we can put like seller to fix a sewer lateral because that will be a point of sale requirement for the city. The escrow fees usually do split. The escrow fees are what the title company charges to process the transaction. In Humboldt County, we normally do a 50-50 split. Owner's title insurance policy, the seller, or we could do a 50-50 split too. So it kind of depends on what kind of offer you want to write. You could also offer to pay for the seller's stuff. So maybe your offer purchase price is a little low, but you want to help them pay for those things that could entice your offer. Um, County transfer tax, we also split those. So a lot of these are split depending on what you want to do. You can ask the seller to pay for a home warranty, which many people will do, or you can just waive the home warranty and get your inspections. The home warranty is a 1 year plan. Like if your water heater breaks or electrical goes out, or maybe your garbage disposal keeps running, the home warranty, you can call them. You pay, I think, $100 for most companies, and then they will come to your house. They'll have like a service provider here locally, and they'll, do the fixes for you. So we can always ask the seller to pay for that. I think right now in a tight buyer's market, we can negotiate quite a bit. So don't be scared to ask. They can just counter that out. Here are different addendums. So say we're making an offer on a tenant occupied property, a property that's rented out. We would want to mark this box, and then it would add another form to the document so that we can sign that and disclose that. Here's some other disclosures that are written, already pre-marked. So buyer investigation advisory, very good one to read. A wire fraud advisory, super important. The Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory, and then the CAL Consumer Privacy Act, the California Consumer Privacy Act. So some really great disclosures, and definitely take time to read through this. And when you meet with me to go over the offer, we go over it just like I'm going over it now, and I answer all the questions that you have. The initial deposit, we talked about that. That would be your earnest money deposit. Any loans, me and your lender are very like working closely together so that we can make sure your loan goes smooth and your sale of your home goes smooth. And that way I can get you the keys. Um, Verification of all of your information. You're going to have to provide me with the verification, either bank statement showing your down payment and closing cost funds, your pre-approval, your bank statement showing me the cash funds if it's a cash offer. Those things will have to be given to the seller. Of course, your account information will be blacked out, but to show them that you can actually buy the house. So we need to prove that we can purchase it. So we're going to, the condition of the property at closing, we're going to go through and make sure that it is in the present physical condition as of the date of acceptance of the offer. So, and it also says delivered as is. As is means that the seller still has to disclose everything to you. But like say you go in and the water heater is leaking on the last day that you're closing. That's something that we would talk to the seller about. The seller still owns the home, and so normally they will help to remedy those items. Okay. And then buyers strongly advised to do all investigations of the property to determine the present condition. And so that's why we get qualified people to look at it for us too. Well, all the eyes on it. Seller remaining in possession after closing, that I don't recommend that um, ever, because basically the seller is going to be renting back from you, the buyer, and there can be a lot of sticky situations on that. Okay, the loan, the lender's going to help us with the loan. The appraisal, the appraiser is the eyes and the ears for the lender. The appraiser is going to be hired by the lender to go to the home to see if that home is worth the money that you're offering. So they want to make sure the value is there. And so we will get a third party appraiser to go out and give an appraisal for the lender. Investigation of property also includes insurance, reviewing seller documents, and all the things. So, after we do review and you feel comfortable about moving forward, we remove the investigation contingency, but we keep the appraisal and the loan as long as we can. The contingencies are there to protect you, and protect, us all in the transaction. And that's our way that we can pull out if we need to. If the property is contingent, maybe the seller needs to sell the property before they buy another one. So their sale might be contingent on them finding a replacement property. So that can happen. The contingency can be on the seller's side too. There's all these items included and excluded. It has pool stuff, pool install equipment, pool heaters. I think there's light bulbs in all items. Okay, so you can just go take the light bulbs out. Windows and door screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings. So you can't just go and take things out. um, you got to make sure that you read this to see that things are included, unless you write in the offer that it's excluded. Then it can, then we remove it. But just want to make sure everything's in writing. Any leased or liened items, that would be like if there's solar panels, propane tanks, those things are leased or liened, then the new buyer has to have all that information. So they can have that, know who to call if something goes wrong, or know who to call if they need more propane. So we kind of talked about the inspections and reports. After we get those, we will review them, and then you can also call the inspector and the inspector will go over them in detail too. I always like my clients to be at the inspection or just come at the end. That way the inspector can talk to you, you can answer any questions, and that really does help. Um, the TDS, NHD, these are disclosures a seller will provide for us, and within that 7 days, you're going to be sitting down and reviewing all these disclosures, and I will as well. There's lead disclosures, there's defensible space, there's a ton of disclosures. Okay. Megan's Law. So it goes on and on and on. Natural hazards disclosure that's provided by a third party company shows you if it's in an earthquake zone, a fire zone, all sorts of things. So a lot of disclosures. More investigations of the property. If you don't get investigations of the property, you're acting um, not by the advice of me. So it's important to get those done. Another thing that we will review within the first 17 days is that preliminary title report. That is basically what you're buying. It shows the chain of title. That chain of title is who owned it previously. Anything that property has been through. It will show liens, it will show abatements, who owns the property, and so much more. So that one is going to be crucial to review, as they all are. But that one, we want to review it, and then we can ask the title company if there's any questions about it. So, okay. So let's see, right here, seller within 7 days shall give Okay, so the seller has to cooperate with selling. They're going to give us all the disclosures. There's certain, forms that the title needs to do the transfer. So the buyer and the seller, they have to be cooperative with that. Title insurance. Um, these are insurance for maybe there's an easement that wasn't on the preliminary title report. The insurance will help fix those certain things. So the title insurance is, if you have more questions about that, we'll talk to the escrow officer. I work a lot with the escrow officer and the lender, and together we get it done. Okay, we already talked about when the seller gives you documents, 7 days, but you have 17 days to review them. We can cancel. So if we feel like we need to cancel, we be upfront and honest and we tell them. And we don't hold anyone's time um, too long if we know we're going to cancel. So uh, if you have any doubts in your mind during the escrow, we just chat about that and we give cancellation so that we can all move on. And that's better chance that the seller will sign to release your deposit. So, like I said, I've never had it happen where the buyer and the seller didn't release a deposit, but it can happen. And when things get sticky in a transaction, you just want to make sure that you're doing everything that you said you would per the contract. So if for example, we weren't removing our appraisal contingency because we weren't sure if the appraisal didn't come in yet, we would either ask for an extension, but also the seller could give us a notice to perform to remove the contingencies. And if the buyer did not remove the contingencies within 3 days, the seller would have the right to cancel. Same goes for the buyer. Say the seller's not signing the documents, their final documents. The buyer can give the seller a notice to perform to sign the documents. And if the seller does not do that within 3 days, then the buyer can cancel. Okay. Okay, so compensation, so seller or buyer or both, as applicable, agree to pay compensation to broker as specified in the separate written agreement between broker and that seller or buyer. So we went over the buyer broker agreement, the first one. When we go to meet and see homes, we're going to have to sign the buyer broker agreement. That goes over the compensation that I will get paid. And we will ask the seller to pay for it in this offer. But if the seller doesn't pay for it, then we gotta talk a little bit and see how I will be compensated for the work that I do. Okay, there's joint escrow instructions. So the title company and the escrow officer has a fiduciary duty to both the buyer and the seller. They're going to draw up these last joint escrow instructions for us. And it's basically everything that the buyer and the seller have agreed upon, like purchase price when we're closing, who's paying for what. Okay. Talks about the multiple listing service. That is where we put all of our listings, and then the listings go out to Zillow, Realtor.com, all of that. Any assignments, you'll have to do that within 17 days. That's like if you're going to sign the purchase agreement to your mom or your brother or cousin or something. If there's any legally authorized signers, we're going to have to know who those people are and note that. Here's some definitions, good definitions and what they mean. I'm not going to read all of those for time's sake, but when you meet with me to buy a home, you'll get a copy of this so you can read it. Time is of the essence. This is the entire contract. This is the liquidated damages clause. So this is where both the buyer and the seller have to sign to release that. And it says here that if buyer fails to complete this purchase agreement because of buyer's default, seller shall retain as liquidated damages the deposit actually paid. If the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, one of which buyer intends to occupy, then the amount retained shall be no more than 3% of the purchase price. So this is where the deposit comes in. We just did a webinar with some attorneys through my office, and it's never advised to not put anything in as your initial deposit. You always want to put something in. Otherwise, it doesn't help the buyer out if something goes wrong. So we want to put something in there. Both buyer and the seller have to sign initial this for it to be actually valid. And then here's the mediation and arbitration. So we would agree to mediate before arbitrating any disputes that came between the buyer and the broker. And again, there's long initials. They have to be initialed to be valid. This is entity of buyers. So if there's an LLC or something, we put that and we put the full name right there, or if it's in a trust. And this is where we sign. And this is where the seller would respond to us. So if they accept it, they sign below here, or they might check this, they might counter some terms. And that's where the sellers would sign. Um, I have myself in this buyer, so it's confusing, but the buyers sign here, and then the seller would respond right here. And then this is where the title and escrow puts their information, or that's actually the agent's information, sorry. And then this is the title and escrow info. Presentation of offer, we would mark that there. If it was not accepted, seller would initial there. Here's a new disclosure. This is for money laundering. So the title company will be asking personal information like social security codes, I think from both the buyer and the seller. So this is a new thing, and it's to prevent money laundering. The buyer investigation advisory, this is just really good information to read, what to think about when going to buy the house. And then possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. This would be if I was maybe representing two different buyers, but they were making an offer on the same house. I can legally help more than one person at the same time. And since we are in such a small town, that could happen. So, and I can help more than one seller at the same time, more than one buyer at the same time. Fair housing and discrimination advisory. We can't just discriminate against any of this. So this is a whole list of things. You have to be very careful with, what you say, what you do, and just treat everyone equally. So that's a good one to read. And then buyers, homeowners, insurance advisory. So the homeowners insurance in California can be, it's a little bit, people are still getting it, but it's expensive. So you want to make sure you're shopping around. And this is an advisory for that so that you can be aware of the California insurance. Wire fraud is crazy right now. People are getting scammed all the time. Do not wire any money unless you call that person to ensure that those wire instructions came from them. So very important that you pick up the phone and call the people and not just email them and text. And in the California Consumer Privacy Act, your information is not disclosed, and they have to tell you if it's, they're sharing your information. And this is the seller license to remain in possession addendum because I clicked on that. So I added it to the bottom. This would be if the seller was, in fact, staying in the house after you bought it. So, like I said, that gets kind of tricky. I don't ever recommend it, but there's that form there. So here is the entire residential purchase agreement, and it's a lot. So, Um, if you have any questions, be happy to sit down and go over it with you in person. And if you're ready to rock and roll and get pre-approved and start looking at houses, let's go. I'm excited to help you. And one more class we'll be having, I'm going to be going over just how to close and what that looks like, how you actually get the keys. And that's going to be on Friday, May 22nd at noon. So there are several ways that you can entice your offer, and it's just kind of specific to you and your needs. So when we meet, we can talk about that. And just thank you so much for watching. And I hope you have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you on May 22nd for the last class of this Zoom series. Thank you.